In June of 2009, a woman named Hazel Bradshaw walked out of her childhood home in Prosper, Texas, wearing a cathedral-length veil her grandmother had hand-stitched over the course of 4 months. She was 28 years old, and in less than 3 hours, she was supposed to become someone's wife. 87 guests were already seated in white folding chairs on the lawn of a converted horse ranch 11 miles east of town. The string quartet had tuned. The caterer had iced the champagne. The groom was standing at the altar adjusting his cufflinks when his best man leaned over and whispered that no one could reach the bride. Hazel Bradshaw wasn't late. She was gone. And when investigators finally found her 519 days later in the finished basement of a house 14 miles from where she vanished, she was still wearing that veil. The fabric was yellow with age and filth, torn in places, repaired in others with thread that didn't match. But it was the same veil, the same seed pearls her grandmother had sewn along the scalloped hem, the same satin comb still tangled in hair that had not been washed in weeks. Welcome back to another video on my channel. To protect the victims, the names and places in this story have been slightly changed. If you have a story of your own to share, make sure to do so using the link down below. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. What Hazel told the responding officers in the first 40 seconds after they breached the basement door was so disorienting, so fundamentally at odds with every theory law enforcement had built over the preceding 17 months, that the lead detective on the case would later say it forced him to reconsider everything he thought he understood about how a person can disappear in plain sight. But before any of that, before the basement, before the veil, before the 17 months of silence that nearly destroyed a family, there was the woman herself. And to understand why Hazel Bradshaw's disappearance cut the way it did, you have to understand who she was on the morning she was supposed to get married. Hazel Bradshaw was the kind of person who made lists about her lists. She kept a color-coded planner, not the aesthetic kind people photograph for social media, but a battered Franklin Covey with tabs she'd customized herself using label maker tape and sticky dots she bought in bulk from an office supply store in McKinney. Her sister Nora described it once as the operating manual for a life that didn't need one. Hazel was a dental hygienist at a family practice in Salina. She drove a silver 2006 Honda Civic with 74,000 miles on it. She kept the oil changed every 3,500 miles instead of the recommended 5,000, because her father had told her once when she was 16 that the extra margin was worth it. That was who Hazel was. The extra margin was always worth it. She had met Ryan Mueller in 2006 at a 4th of July barbecue hosted by a mutual friend in Frisco. Ryan was an electrician, quiet, solidly built, the kind of man who showed up early and stayed late to help clean. They dated for 2 years before he proposed, and the proposal itself was so planned, so precisely calibrated to Hazel's temperament, that everyone who knew them said it was the most Ryan thing imaginable. He had driven her to the spot on Lake Lavon where they'd had their first real conversation, a patch of grass near the boat ramp where they'd sat on a borrowed blanket and talked until mosquitoes drove them back to the car. And he'd brought the same blanket, still folded in the trunk of his pickup, and laid it down in the same spot and gotten on one knee while the sun was doing the exact thing to the water that it had been doing that first night. She said yes before he finished the question. The wedding was planned for June 20th, 2009. A Saturday. Venue was the Winding Creek Ranch, a property outside Prosper that had been converted from a working horse operation into an event space. Hazel had chosen it because the ceremony site backed up to an open pasture with 2 aging cottonwood trees that framed the aisle like a natural archway. She'd visited the venue 4 times before booking it. She'd photographed the light at different hours. She'd checked the weather averages for the 3rd week of June in Collin County. Highs typically in the mid-90s, humidity moderate, wind out of the south at 8 to 12 miles per hour, and scheduled the ceremony for 6:30 p.m., when the sun would be low enough to soften the light, but high enough to keep the pasture golden. That was Hazel. She did not leave things to chance. The morning of June 20th was unremarkable in every measurable way. Clear skies, temperature already climbing past 80 by 9 o'clock. Hazel woke up in her childhood bedroom in the house on Prosper Trail Road, where her parents, Dennis and Marianne Bradshaw, still lived. Nora was there. So was Hazel's maid of honor, a college friend named Jess Kinnard, and two bridesmaids who had driven in from out of state the night before. Marianne had made breakfast: scrambled eggs, turkey bacon, fruit she'd cut the night before, and kept in Tupperware in the fridge. The five women ate together at the kitchen table. Hazel's planner was open next to her plate. She had the day broken into 30-minute blocks. 9 a.m., breakfast; 9:30, showers, rotating; 10, hair and makeup artist arrives; 12:30, lunch, light. She'd specified turkey wraps from a deli in Prosper she liked, already ordered and scheduled for delivery. 1:30, dress; 2 o'clock, first look photos with Nora; 3 o'clock, family photos at the house; 4:30, leave for venue, the ceremony at 6:30. She had even noted in the margin a 5-minute buffer between each block in case someone is slow. Everything ran on time through the morning. Hair and makeup went smoothly. The stylist, a woman named Courtney Alvarez who worked weddings across the northern Dallas suburbs, would later tell police that Hazel was calm, cheerful, maybe a little quieter than some brides, but not in a way that seemed wrong. She was focused, Courtney said. She wanted everything to look the way she'd planned it. I remember she brought a reference photo she'd printed out, not from a magazine, from her own phone, a picture of herself at a friend's wedding 2 years earlier. She liked how her hair looked that night and she wanted to match it exactly. Courtney finished Hazel's hair at 11:15. Makeup was done by noon. Lunch arrived on time. The women ate. Hazel checked items off in her planner with a fine point pen she kept clipped to the cover. At 1 p.m., she excused herself to take a shower. A second one, a quick rinse to cool down before getting into the dress, which she'd explained to Nora the week before was necessary because the houses upstairs ran warm and she didn't want to be sweating when the satin went on. Nora didn't think anything of it. Hazel was always thinking one step ahead. Hazel went upstairs. The bathroom was at the end of the hall, past her parents' bedroom and a linen closet. Nora heard the water turn on. She went back downstairs to help Jess steam the bridesmaids' dresses. 20 minutes passed. The water turned off. Nora assumed Hazel was drying her hair, doing a final check of herself in the mirror, going through whatever private ritual a woman goes through before she puts on a wedding dress. Another 15 minutes passed. Nora checked her phone. It was 1:38 p.m. She walked upstairs. The bathroom door was open. The mirror was still fogged. A towel hung over the shower rod, damp. Hazel's robe was draped across the toilet lid. Her phone was on the counter next to the sink, plugged into a charger. Her engagement ring sat beside it in a small ceramic dish she'd had since college. The bedroom door across the hall was closed. Nora knocked. No answer. She opened it. The room was empty. The window was open, not all the way, but about 8 inches, the way Hazel always kept it because she liked the cross breeze. The wedding dress hung on the closet door, still in its garment bag. The veil, the hand-stitched cathedral veil with the seed pearls, was not on its hanger. It was gone. And so was Hazel. The next 90 minutes were a study in controlled disintegration. Nora checked every room in the house. Jess called Hazel's phone. It rang from the bathroom counter, untouched. They checked the garage. Both family cars were there. Hazel's silver Civic was parked in the driveway, keys hanging on the hook inside the kitchen door where she always kept them. Her purse, a small tan crossbody she carried everywhere, was on the bedroom floor, wallet inside, driver's license in its slot. By 2:15, Dennis and Marianne had been pulled into the search. Dennis walked the property, the backyard, the shed, the side yard that ran along a cedar fence to the neighbor's lot. Nothing. No footprints in the flower bed below the open window. No sign of struggle. No note. At 2:40, Nora called Ryan. He was at the ranch, already dressed, going over the playlist with the DJ. She told him Hazel wasn't in the house and she couldn't find her. There was a pause that Nora would describe later as the longest silence she'd ever heard from another person. Then Ryan said, "I'm coming." He was there in 14 minutes, at 3:05 p.m., the exact time Hazel had scheduled for family photos. Dennis Bradshaw called the Prosper Police Department and reported his daughter missing. Dispatch logged the call at 3:07. The responding officer, a patrol deputy named Kevin Schaff, arrived at the house at 3:22. He walked the property, took statements from everyone present, confirmed that Hazel's car, phone, purse, wallet, and keys were all accounted for. He noted the open window. He noted the missing veil. At 4:10 p.m., Deputy Schaff requested a detective. The 87 guests at Winding Creek Ranch waited. Some had heard something was wrong by then. Word travels fast in a town the size Prosper was in 2009, before the population boom turned it from a quiet farming community into one of the fastest-growing suburbs in the state. The caterer kept the champagne on ice. The string quartet played a second set, then a third. At 5:45, Ryan's father walked to the front of the aisle and told the guests that the wedding would not be taking place that evening. He did not say Hazel was missing. He said there had been a family emergency. Some guests cried, most just sat there, not understanding. By sundown, the Prosper Police Department had opened a formal missing persons investigation. And the question that would consume a family, a town, and eventually a multi-agency task force for the next 17 months had been asked for the first time. Where was Hazel Bradshaw? And why had she taken nothing with her except a veil? Detective Mike Rainey caught the case on a Monday, 2 days after Hazel vanished, when it was transferred from patrol to the Criminal Investigations Division. Rainey was 43, a 15-year veteran of Collin County law enforcement who had spent the previous 6 years working cases that ranged from property theft to aggravated assault. He had never worked a missing persons case where the circumstances were quite like this. No one in the department had. The first thing Rainey did was establish a timeline. He pulled cell phone records. He interviewed every person who had been in the Bradshaw house that morning. He walked the property with a crime scene technician and spent 45 minutes in Hazel's bedroom with a flashlight, examining the window frame, the carpet, the closet. He ordered a K-9 unit from the county, and on the afternoon of June 22nd, a tracking dog named Breck was brought to the house and given Hazel's scent from the robe she'd left in the bathroom. Breck followed the scent from the bathroom to the bedroom, from the bedroom to the open window. From the window, the dog went outside and tracked along the side of the house to the backyard fence, turned east, and followed the cedar fence line for approximately 40 yards before losing the trail at the edge of a drainage easement that ran behind the Bradshaw's property and connected to a network of shallow storm channels cutting through the subdivision. The drainage easement was dry. It hadn't rained in Prosper for 9 days. The ground was hard-packed clay and gravel, not the kind of surface that held footprints. But Breck had followed a scent trail, which meant Hazel had walked this route, on foot, barefoot, or in light shoes, away from her own house on her wedding day, carrying her grandmother's veil and nothing else. That was the first thing that didn't fit. The second was the phone. Cell records showed that Hazel had not made or received a call since 8:47 that morning when she'd texted Ryan a single line. "Today's the day. Love you." Ryan had texted back a heart emoji and a string of exclamation points. There was no outgoing communication after that. No texts, no calls, no app activity. Her phone never left the bathroom counter. If someone had contacted her, prompted her, lured her, they hadn't done it through her phone. The third anomaly was the window. The Bradshaw house was a single-story ranch-style home with the bedrooms on the east side. Hazel's childhood bedroom had a casement window, the kind that cranks open on a hinge, that faced the side yard. The window opened to a maximum of about 10 inches. Hazel was 5'4" and weighed approximately 118 pounds. A crime scene tech confirmed that a person of her build could physically fit through the opening, but it would require deliberate effort, turning sideways, pulling herself through, dropping roughly 3 feet to the ground below. It was not something you did accidentally. It was not something you did in a hurry unless you had a reason. Rainey's team canvassed the neighborhood. They knocked on every door within a quarter mile of the Bradshaw house. No one had seen Hazel leave. No one had seen anyone unusual on Prosper Trail Road that afternoon. A retired schoolteacher named Gladys Embry, who lived 2 houses east and spent most of her afternoons on her screened porch with a crossword puzzle, told officers she had been sitting outside from noon until almost 3 o'clock and had not seen a single person walk past her house. But the drainage easement ran behind the houses, not along the road. If Hazel had gone that way, Gladys wouldn't have seen her. 2 security cameras existed within range. One was a doorbell camera at a house on the corner of Prosper Trail and Farm to Market Road 1385, too far north to capture the Bradshaw's side of the street. The other was a camera mounted on a detached garage belonging to a family named Velasquez, 3 lots east. Rainey's team pulled the footage. The camera's field of view covered the Velasquez driveway and a narrow slice of the easement behind their property. At 1:31 p.m. on June 20th, 7 minutes before Nora went upstairs and found the bedroom empty, a shape moved through the far edge of the frame. It was visible for less than 2 seconds. The resolution was poor, the angle oblique, but the shape was consistent with a person walking east along the easement. And trailing behind, catching the light for a single frame, was something long and pale that could have been fabric. Rainey's team enhanced the footage as much as the equipment allowed. They could not confirm the figure was Hazel. They could not confirm the trailing object was a veil. But the timestamp aligned, the direction aligned, and no one else had any reason to be walking through a suburban drainage easement at 1:31 on a Saturday afternoon in June. The question shifted. Hazel had left the house voluntarily. She had squeezed through a window, dropped to the ground, walked along a fence line, entered a drainage easement, and moved east. She had left behind her phone, her car, her purse, her wallet, her keys, her engagement ring, and her wedding dress. She had taken only the veil. Why? Within the first week, 3 competing theories formed inside the department and in the wider community, and each one had adherents who felt certain the others were wrong. The first was cold feet. The simplest explanation. Hazel had panicked. The pressure of the wedding, the finality of it, some private doubt she had never voiced. It had overwhelmed her, and she had run. The veil was an artifact of the panic, something she'd been holding when the impulse struck and hadn't thought to put down. Proponents of this theory pointed out that runaway brides were not unheard of, that the absence of a struggle supported voluntary departure, and that people under extreme emotional stress did not always behave in ways that made sense from the outside. The problem with this theory was Hazel herself. Everyone, Nora, Jess, Ryan, Courtney the stylist, her co-workers at the dental practice, her parents, said the same thing. Hazel was not ambivalent about this wedding. She had planned it with the same rigor she brought to everything. Her planner for the day was meticulous, her demeanor that morning calm and organized. People don't always show what they feel, of course. But the theory required Hazel to have hidden a crisis so deep that it drove her out a window, and no one who knew her saw even a hairline crack. The second theory was abduction. Someone had taken her. The open window in this reading was not an exit, but an entry, or a stage detail meant to misdirect. Perhaps someone had come to the window, spoken to Hazel through it, convinced or coerced her to come outside. Perhaps there had been a threat. This theory explained the speed and completeness of the disappearance. Hazel had been taken by someone who planned it, but it struggled with the physical evidence, no signs of forced entry, no strange DNA on the window frame or sill, no foreign prints, no witnesses to a vehicle. And the K9 track, which followed a walking path along the fence and into the easement, not a path consistent with being carried or dragged. The third theory was the one that took hold most slowly and cut deepest when it did. Someone Hazel knew, someone she trusted, had been waiting for her. She had gone willingly, but she had gone to the wrong person, and the veil was not a random object. It was a signal, a totem, a piece of the story she was walking into. Detective Rainey did not publicly favor any theory. Privately, his notes from that first week reveal a man who was troubled by the veil more than anything else. In a margin note dated June 25th, 5 days after the disappearance, he wrote, "The veil is the key. She left everything practical behind and took the one thing that only mattered symbolically. Either she wasn't thinking at all, or she was thinking about something we don't understand yet." The search expanded. By the end of June, the Prosper Police Department had partnered with the Collin County Sheriff's Office and the Texas Rangers. Flyers went up across the county. Hazel's face, her height and weight, the clothes she'd last been seen wearing, A white cotton robe, though investigators acknowledged she may have changed before leaving. A tip line was established. In the first week, it received over 200 calls. Most were useless, sightings in other states that didn't pan out, psychics offering visions, well-meaning strangers who had seen a woman with brown hair at a gas station somewhere. None led anywhere. Ryan Mueller submitted to a polygraph voluntarily on June 28th. He passed without issue. His alibi for the relevant window, roughly 1:15 to 1:45 p.m. on June 20th, was airtight. He had been at Winding Creek Ranch with his groomsmen, the DJ, and the venue coordinator, all of whom confirmed his presence. Rainey interviewed him 3 times in the first 2 weeks. Each time, Ryan was cooperative, coherent, and visibly devastated. He told Rainey that Hazel had seemed happy that morning when they spoke briefly by phone at 7:30. She'd told him not to forget the rings, a joke between them because Ryan had once forgotten to bring the tickets to a concert and they'd had to drive home and back. "That's the last thing she said to me," Ryan told Rainey. "Don't forget the rings." In early July, investigators executed a search warrant on the Bradshaw house. They examined Hazel's computer, a 3-year-old Dell laptop she kept in her bedroom. They pulled her browser history, her email, her social media accounts. They found nothing alarming. Her most recent search, on the night of June 19th, was for the weather forecast for June 20th. Before that, she'd been looking at honeymoon itineraries. She and Ryan had booked a week in Cozumel, departing the Monday after the wedding. The browsing history showed a woman engaged in the logistics of a life she expected to continue living. There was no indication of distress, no searches for bus schedules, shelters, or new identities, no contact with anyone outside her known circle. There was, however, one thing. Deep in Hazel's email, in a folder she had labeled Old, investigators found a thread of 17 messages exchanged between Hazel and an address that didn't correspond to anyone in her contacts. The address was a generic Gmail handle, the kind of anonymous string of letters and numbers that could belong to anyone. The messages spanned a period from March to May of 2009, roughly 3 months before the wedding. They were not romantic. They were not threatening. They were, by any normal reading, strange. The first message, sent by the unknown address to Hazel on March 3rd, read, "I know you felt it too. The wrongness. The sense that this path was chosen for you before you understood what choosing meant. You don't have to answer. But I know." Hazel had not responded for 11 days. Then, on March 14th, she wrote back a single line. "Who is this?" The exchange continued. The unknown sender wrote in long, careful paragraphs. They never identified themselves. They never made demands. They spoke about Hazel's life as though they knew its outlines, the dental practice, the engagement, the house she was planning to buy with Ryan in a subdivision called Whitley Place, but always in general enough terms that the knowledge could have come from social media, mutual acquaintances, or simple observation. The tone was intimate but not romantic, concerned but not parental. It read like a mentor speaking to someone they believed was making a mistake, except the mistake, as the sender defined it, was not the wedding itself. It was something they called, in multiple messages, the narrowing. "You've been building a corridor," the sender wrote on April 7th. "Each decision closes a door behind you. Job, partner, house, town. You think you're building a life. You're building a hallway, and hallways only go one direction." Hazel's replies were shorter, cautious, but she kept replying. She never told the sender to stop. She never reported the messages. She asked questions. "What do you mean by the narrowing?" And "How do you know about my life?" And once, in a message dated May 12th that Rainey circled in his case file, "What would you have me do instead?" The sender's response to that question was the last message in the thread. It was dated May 14th, 37 days before the wedding. It read, "When the moment comes, you'll know. The veil is the thread. Follow it out." Rainey read that line over and over. He had it printed and pinned to the caseboard in the conference room the department had converted into a war room. The veil is the thread. Follow it out. Someone had been in Hazel's head for months. Someone had planted an idea, or watered one already growing, and the idea had blossomed on June 20th into an open window and a vanishing. The Gmail address was subpoenaed. Google complied, but the account had been created using a prepaid phone number that was no longer active and an IP address that traced to a public library in McKinney, 15 miles south of Prosper. The library's surveillance footage from the relevant dates had already been overwritten. The account had been accessed exclusively from public Wi-Fi networks, libraries, coffee shops, a McDonald's in Allen. Whoever was behind it understood how to be invisible. Summer turned. July became August. August became September. The tip line slowed to a trickle. Searches of the drainage easement, the surrounding fields, and the undeveloped land east of Prosper produced nothing. No clothing, no footprints preserved in any medium, no veil snagged on a fence or caught in a culvert. Hazel Bradshaw had walked into the easement and evaporated. The family held together the way families in crisis do, through motion, through ritual, through the refusal to sit still. Nora organized volunteer search parties every weekend through July and August, combing fields, walking creek beds, posting flyers at truck stops along Highway 380 and the Sam Rayburn Tollway. Dennis Bradshaw retired early from his job managing a feed supply company in Anna, unable to concentrate on anything except his daughter. Marianne stopped sleeping through the night and developed a habit of standing at the kitchen window at 2 a.m., looking out at the backyard as if Hazel might simply walk back through the gap in the cedar fence. Ryan moved through those months like a man underwater. He went to work. He answered calls from the police when they came. He attended every volunteer search. But Nora noticed that something was changing in him, not suspiciously, not in a way that suggested guilt, but in a way that suggested a man whose understanding of reality had been fundamentally disrupted. He kept saying the same thing, Nora recalled later. She wouldn't do this to us. Over and over, she wouldn't do this to us. Like if he said it enough times, it would become a clue instead of just a feeling. In October of 2009, 4 months after the disappearance, Detective Rainey presented the case to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit through a formal consultation request. 2 agents reviewed the file remotely. Their assessment, delivered in a 9-page report, offered a profile of the unknown email sender that was careful in its conclusions, but unsettling in its implications. The sender, the BAU analysts wrote, demonstrated a high degree of emotional intelligence and social awareness, consistent with an individual who has studied the target extensively and who possesses the verbal facility to establish rapport without revealing identity. The language in the emails was deliberately non-coercive, designed to make the target feel that any action taken was her own idea. The phrase, "the veil is the thread," was, in the analyst's view, a ritualized directive embedded in symbolic language, the kind of instruction that bypasses rational processing and operates on emotional resonance. In plainer words, someone had groomed Hazel Bradshaw, not sexually, not financially, psychologically. Someone had studied her, identified her vulnerabilities, her rigidity, her need for control, the way her life was organized so tightly that the smallest disruption felt like a crack in the foundation, and had methodically convinced her that the life she was building was a trap. The veil was the symbol they had given her, a thread to follow, a way out of the corridor. But out to where? And to whom? The investigation stalled through the winter. Rainey continued to work the case, but by January 2010, the leads had dried to almost nothing. The anonymous email account sat dormant. No new sightings came in that could be verified. The Collin County Medical Examiner's Office had no unidentified remains matching Hazel's description. She was not in any hospital, jail, or shelter database in the state of Texas. She had not used her Social Security number, accessed her bank account, or renewed her driver's license. For all practical purposes, Hazel Bradshaw had ceased to exist on June 20th, 2009, and the world had closed around the hole she left. Spring came. The 1-year anniversary approached. Nora organized a vigil at the Prosper Community Church, and over 100 people attended, including some who had been wedding guests the year before. Ryan stood in the back and left before it ended. Marianne spoke briefly, her voice steady until the last sentence when she said, "My daughter is somewhere, and she needs us to keep looking." And then she couldn't say anything else. Rainey attended the vigil. He stood near the door with his arms crossed, watching the faces. He had not given up on the case, but he had reached a point that every detective on a long-term missing persons case eventually reaches, the point where the absence of evidence begins to feel like evidence of something in itself. No body meant Hazel might be alive. No contact meant she was being held, or she had chosen silence, or she was dead and simply hadn't been found. Each possibility branched into sub-possibilities that branched again, an endlessly forking path with no ground truth at the end of any branch. He went home that night and reread the email thread for what he estimated was the 40th time. The veil is the thread. Follow it out. He had the line memorized the way a person memorizes a song they can't stop hearing. He had traced the public Wi-Fi locations on a map and found no pattern. He had cross-referenced the library visits with sign-in logs and found nothing. The McKinney Library didn't require patrons to sign in to use the computers. He had run linguistic analysis on the emails through a software tool the Rangers used and gotten back a profile that told him the writer was likely male, likely educated, likely between 35 and 55, and likely familiar with therapeutic or philosophical language, none of which narrowed the field enough to matter. What Rainey could not know, what no one could know, standing in that church on a warm evening in June 2010, was that the answer was already close. 14 miles from where he stood, in a residential neighborhood in the town of Salina, in a house with a brick facade and a neatly trimmed boxwood hedge and a 2-car garage that was always closed, something was happening beneath the floor that would rewrite every assumption the investigation had made. That was where the story ended. Until the morning of November 21st, 2010, when a plumber named Gary Estes called to fix a sewage backup at a property on County Road 85, opened a basement access panel he'd been told didn't exist, and found himself face to face with a woman sitting in a folding chair, wearing a yellowed cathedral veil, who looked up at him and said very quietly, "Are you here to take me to the church?"